Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today I am sharing the forgery on the fourth project as part of the Counterfeit Kit design team. And what that means is we are inspired by real-world craft supplies and we recreate our own versions. So I am going to be creating two different pattern papers today, one with stamping and one with watercoloring. So let's dive in. First up, I want to recreate the Snowflake pattern paper from Kit Club. So I pulled out a sheet of white cardstock and this stamp set from Hero Arts, and I will link you up to everything below, both products and information about the Counterfeit Kit Club if you don't know what that is already. I am going to prep my stamps, put them all on stamping blocks so that I can work back and forth between all of them easily and I won't have to interrupt my flow. Now, the original product had a pink, an aqua, and a yellow color palette. I am going to be adding in a navy blue because I do have navy blue in my other kit supplies this month. And if you haven't seen my kit build, I will link you up to that as well. I have a variety of sizes of these stamps, and this little stamp has several images all hooked together on it. And the original pattern paper had a smattering of these smaller images throughout. I'm not going to separate out all these images, so these are going to be a smattering of clusters all about. I am going to pay attention to balancing when I am creating this pattern paper. So when I talk about balancing, there is size to be balanced and there is color to be balanced. If you have a dark color like that navy, it is going to draw the eye a lot more than softer colors will. So if I were to stamp these large snowflakes in that navy color, they would really pop off the page. And I don't want the navy to take up that much attention. So I chose the lightest color of my color palette to be the biggest item on the page. And so that's going to help balance all of these pieces so that no one image necessarily grabs all the attention. The other two colors that I'm using here are this yellow color and a pink color. And all my inks are ink pad cubes from Concord and Ninth, and I can link you up to those as well. I just really like the Concord and Ninth colors, and I like their style of ink pads. I have a couple of full-size ink pads, but the ink cubes are really affordable, and even on these larger size stamps, they work pretty well. So I am using this mid-size snowflake in both yellow and pink to, again, for that color balance idea there. The other thing I'm doing a little bit differently with my piece is that I'm starting with a kind of a symmetrical base. I think the inspiration piece had a lot more randomness to it. And as you can see me filling in the spaces here with the third size of this snowflake stamp, I am using that in the navy color. And I will fill in the gaps in between all of this grid of snowflakes with more of the randomness of the small snowflakes. So when I am stamping patterns like this, I do start my largest images so that I know I have room to fit them. And then I will move to my next largest image and fill in some of those gaps, and then my third largest to fill in those gaps, and so on and so forth, working my way down the size scale. So those are just a few tips and tricks of stamping your own pattern paper if that's not something you've tried before. And if you have tips and tricks that do work really well for you, leave us a comment below because we all like to learn from each other. And here's a final look at how that pattern paper turned out before we move on to the watercoloring. Now the watercoloring was inspired again by the Kit Club papers, and it's kind of this abstract wagon wheel style. I am going to use circle templates to draw the circles out because I do not have a very steady hand. I'm using a die set, but if you don't have a die set like this, you can use any object that has a circle to it, glue, tape, whatever you've got. So I'm going to pull out 3 sizes of circles to work with here. I'm just kind of used to working in 3s in terms of, design concepts. So that tends to where my brain goes first when I'm picking things out. So again, I am drawing 3 of these big circles across the page, and then I realize if I'm going to be able to fill in this entire pattern paper, I'm going to need to add in a 4th one. And then, like I did with the snowflakes, I am going to be starting with my largest size and filling in the the gaps with the next size down, and so on. Now, a little bit about this pattern paper. It's just plain white cardstock. It's textured on one side and smooth on the other. Normally, you would not want to watercolor on this, but this is more like drawing with a marker than it is like watercoloring. So if you're feeling intimidated about the idea of watercoloring, if you can draw with a marker, you can do this. After I get my pencil marks down, I do erase them to really lighten them up. And that's one thing to know about watercoloring, is that the color is translucent, so you can see through it, and it will trap that pencil mark underneath the binding agent in the paint. So if you have a light color over a dark pencil mark, you will see that dark pencil mark. Hopefully you've heard me say that multiple times before, but if you're new to watercoloring, I wanted to make that clear. Now I am using my new Grabie travel watercolor set that I just did a review on. So if you want to know more about that paint set, I will link you up. Because I do love watercolor, I play with lots of different products, and this one was sent to me for free to try out. So I like to keep using it in my real world to get a longer term view than just a shorter review. So that is what I'm doing here. And the biggest thing that I have about this paint palette is that there's just not enough room for me to mix colors, because this will take quite a bit of paint, and I am mixing my own colors. Now, you could solve this problem just by using the colors straight out of the paint palette, but because I was trying to work with the ink color palette that I had on my previous piece, I was mixing colors to get closer matches. So I will talk a little bit more about that. As you mix paint colors, I am less experienced with that, and some of you may not have any experience with that. And trying to get a second batch of paint to exactly match the first batch of paint you mixed can be a challenge. So here I've mixed a second batch, and I'm adding that second batch into other areas that I'm painting, so that any of my inconsistent color matching will flow throughout the piece, and that way it looks purposeful and not like a mistake. So once I've reset my paint to add in a little bit more yellow to get closer to my original paint, then I have more paint to work with. Now, if you don't have watercolor paint, you can do this with a marker. You could also use ink pads. You squish an ink pad onto a plastic surface, and then it becomes a watercolor palette for you. So there's lots of ways to make this project happen, even if you don't watercolor. But I just love watercolor. If you spend any amount of time here on my channel, you will know that watercolor is one of my favorites. I like how the color can lighten and darken. You get different values of that. It can blend and flow. And so I thought this inspired piece of pattern paper really lent well to the watercolor effects that you can get. So I am using here, I've mixed up kind of a teal shade, and so I am moving on with my third color in my palette. And as I'm working on these wagon wheels, I am kind of peeking off to the inspiration piece on the left, but I'm also kind of letting my ideas flow. So I decided that I needed to add more rings to this. So I'm adding a second thin ring around the outside of the first ring, and then more rings around that middle. And it just gives it more detail and more dimension to this painting. And then when I went back and looked at the inspiration, you know what? That was there already, and I had forgotten about it. So sometimes inspiration sticks in your brain, even if you're not necessarily consciously aware of it. And I find that to be true for me in quite a bit of what I do. So sometimes just sharing these videos and having you watch them, it might spark some ideas that pop up somewhere else down the road in your crafty life. So I hope that becomes true for you. And then I am finishing up this piece with my fourth color, which is that pink. And again, I've mixed it up. You can see my paint palette there is starting to run low on this color. And again, that's another great place where ink pads actually would make a great watercolor palette, because you've already got that color as is, and you don't ever have to mix it up and worry about running out. Well, I guess you could still run out from an ink pad, but it's easy to get more, I should say, rather than trying to mix your own colors. So as I'm working here, I'm also creating thinner and thicker lines to this project, partially as a time saver. If I've got thicker lines going on, then it's not going to take me as long to paint. And I will say that this piece took me probably more than an hour to get through, but I just put on some music in the background and I sang and I painted, and it was kind of meditative for me. So here is a final look at that piece, and I hope if watercoloring feels intimidating to you that this gives you some inspiration to give it a try. And you can try it on a smaller scale. You do not have to do a full 12 by 12 sheet. That is it for this time. Until I am back with you on Friday, I hope you have an artful day.